Hey guys, today we're diving into the world of Redfall, pushing its limits with an RTX 4070 Ti at 3440 by 1440 resolution. We won't stop there though, as we'll also be overclocking and undervolting our GPU to see just how far we can push the performance on this stunning game. To make sure we get the most accurate results, I've played the game for 30 minutes with each configuration. So stay tuned as we compare the numbers, analyze the performance, and share some tips for optimizing your own experience with the RTX 4070 Ti. And as always, if you enjoy our content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and everything else. Now let's get started and see what the RTX 4070 Ti can do for Redfall. Okay, so as far as overclocking goes, I've just increased the power limit to 119%, added 200 MHz to the core clock, and also increased the memory clock by 1300 MHz. Now, when it comes to underclocking, I've set some specific parameters for our GPU. We've limited it to 900 millivolts, maintained a 119% power limit, and adjusted the core clock to an additional 150 MHz, while also increasing the memory clock by 1500 MHz. Alright, let's kick things off by testing Redfall with DLSS set to quality. Frame generation is enabled, and our system is overclocked. These settings deliver fantastic performance, boasting high average FPS and some impressive 1% lows. Keep in mind that the numbers you're seeing were recorded after playing for over 30 minutes with these settings. Now, it's worth mentioning that the temperatures could be better, but we're dealing with a particularly hot day today, and as you can see, our power consumption has definitely increased due to the overclocking. The question we'll be exploring is whether this uptick in power usage is truly worth it for the performance gains we're achieving, or not. Next up, we'll be testing Redfall with DLSS set to quality, frame generation enabled, and our system undervolted. As you can see, we're still achieving some really impressive FPS numbers with these settings, staying well above 100 FPS. I mean, like it's really good. And what's truly remarkable is just how low the power consumption has become. It's incredible to see how much of a difference undervolting can make in terms of power efficiency. Oh, and by the way guys, I didn't include the clips with frame generation disabled in this video, but I've still got those results for you. Just hang tight until the end of the video and we can just have a look at all the charts and comparisons with frame generation enabled and disabled. Okay, so now I'm just basically leaving the stock settings instead of overclocking or undervolting. DLSS is still set to quality and frame generation is on. And well, we're still getting some pretty high FPS, just not as high as when we had our system overclocked. And the power consumption is pretty much the same as when we overclocked the system, so I think it kind of makes sense to just overclock it. And on the other hand, I mean, like when we had it undervolted, we were still getting some pretty good FPS at nearly half of the power consumption. So it doesn't make much sense to use stock settings, I'd say. Okay, so let's move on to testing DLAA now. Yeah, we're still gonna have frame generation enabled and our GPU is gonna be overclocked. And DLAA looks so freaking good in this game. I mean, like really good. And there's also a problem that you're gonna get if you just use DLSS instead of DLAA. And it's that sometimes you'll find that some trees are going to start shimmering and it's a bit distracting at times. But yeah, let's get back to analyzing this. We can see that we're getting some pretty high FPS, like really good FPS. and the 1% lows are above 60, so yeah, you're gonna get a pretty good smooth experience with these settings. Okay, so let's continue now and test DLAA enabled with frame generation on and our GPU undervolted. I've noticed that this clip the FPS are a bit lower than they actually are. Like during my normal gameplay, you can see that I've got an average of 100 FPS, and the 1% lows are actually higher than what you are seeing on screen. Like they're above 60 as well. So that makes this configuration, like, it's one of my favorite configurations to play the game at, because you get such a low power draw and the temperatures are just great. I mean, 51 degrees, 52 degrees, it's just perfect. So yeah, this is one of the better configurations in my opinion. Alright, so now let's test the exact same settings, but this time we're just going to be using the stock GPU settings instead of overclocking or undervolting. And we're pretty much seeing the exact same behavior as before. FPS are still worse than if we're overclocking. Power consumption is still very high compared to the undervolting version. So then once more, it just doesn't make sense to play on stock settings. And this area here is a bit less demanding than some other areas, but all the charts we'll be having on the end, you can see the exact numbers for the average FPS and lows, and you'll see that it's not doing particularly well compared to the undervolting version. In fact, the undervolting version it has a bit higher average FPS here. Okay, so I also added this special configuration where everything is set to high instead of ultra settings, and I'll be using DLSS balanced with the GPU undervolted. Ignore the 1% lows that you're seeing on the overlay because they're actually a lot higher. You can expect to be well in the 90 range. So yeah, I've included this specific configuration because sometimes just playing at 60 FPS, especially the lows, like when you have 1% lows of 60 FPS, you can really like notice that it's not that smooth. And with these settings here, you're gonna have a consistent high FPS experience, like perfect experience. And to be honest, you won't notice much of a difference in image quality. There really isn't that much difference between high and ultra in this game. Okay, so these are the results, and it's pretty obvious that it doesn't make sense to disable frame generation. You're going to be getting 1% low FPS that are like 40, mid 40s, and it really breaks the experience. You can definitely feel those drops. Like when you're playing above 60 and you go down to 40, you're gonna notice it. So it makes sense to just play with frame generation enabled. We can also see that undervolting makes a lot of sense in this game, like really makes a lot of sense. The frames per second you're gonna be getting are just as good as stock settings, and you're gonna be having much lower temperatures and power draw. And also we can see here on the last line of the last settings that we tested, that we're getting 170 average FPS and 92 FPS as 1% lows, which is really good. So yeah, let's move on to the power draw and temperatures chart. Okay, and here once more we can just see the undervolted version managing temperatures really good and having a really low power consumption. It's just crazy in this game that with half the power you can achieve such high FPS. Okay, so let's just move to the efficiency charts. And in this last chart you can just see what I've been saying the whole video basically. You can just play with your GPU undervolted and get a really good efficiency, or play with your GPU overclocked and get a bit better efficiency than on stock settings. And that wraps up our Redfall benchmarking adventure, folks. I hope you found this video helpful in understanding the impact of the different configurations on performance, power consumption, and temperatures. Be sure to drop a comment down below with your thoughts on these results, or if you have any questions or suggestions for future tests. Your feedback helps us create even better content for you. And don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed this video.